Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Rains website at praetorrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast. Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast, and joining today, along with Richard and Lisa, two of our regular contributors, we all have a very special guest. We're delighted that from across the Irish Sea we have Senator John McGahon, who is a senator in Ireland for the border region of Louth. So welcome to the podcast, John. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi John, thanks for having me.
And Richard obviously is the connection here because you've known Richard for quite some time and you've already said hello, and I think he's sending you a focused delivery round just in case.
Yeah, I well believe it.
So, I mean, the first point I think we should start on is probably you're a senator, which is the upper house in Ireland. I think maybe our listeners who probably don't know an awful lot about Irish politics, could you just describe how the kind of setup is in Ireland regarding the political chambers?
Yeah, okay. So, well, this is the first time I've ever done a podcast interview. So, really excited that it's the Lib Dem Podcast because I have been a secret listener for the last year because I see it on Tom Morrison's Twitter and I see it on Richard's Twitter. And yeah, so it's kind of cool to be on it and that this is the first time I've done anything like this. So please bear with me. To give a brief rundown of, I suppose, what our legislative system is here. We have a lower house, which is Dáil Éireann, and that's elected by the constituencies in Ireland. And we have an upper house, which is Seanad Éireann. And essentially, Seanad Éireann is actually probably quite a small electorate. So there's 60 senators. And of the 60 senators, 49 senators are elected by the 950 county councillors in Ireland, the 60 outgoing senators from the previous Senate, and the 155 TDs that are elected to the Dáil. 11 are appointed by the Taoiseach of the day, and 6 are elected from graduates of universities. So 3 are elected from the graduates of Trinity College Dublin, and another 3 are elected from the graduates of the NUI universities in Ireland. So that's the UCD, UCC in Cork, UCG in Galway. Essentially how the Senate election takes place 90 days after the Dáil has been dissolved for a general election. And basically what you have is I got elected on the Culture and Educational panel. There's 5 different panels: agriculture, industrial and commercial, labour, administrative and culture and educational. And when the Senate was originally set up, those panels are really designed as a way of electing people who have a background or a special, interest in those areas. They're quite difficult to qualify for. So the reason I qualified for the Culture and Educational panel is because I sat on the board of my local arts centre for a considerable period of time. And but to be pretty blunt about it, the Senate is 2 things. Like, to be honest about it, the Senate essentially is a crash landing pad for TDs who lose their seats. They then run for the Senate and they can get elected to the Senate. Or it's usually used as a springboard for people like me. I ran in the last general election. I didn't get elected, but I may have potential to win a seat in the next election. So it can be used as a springboard to get future TDs elected. That's the blunt. Some of my colleagues would, be annoyed that I'd say something like that, but let's be straight about it. That's the blunt end of what the Senate is for a lot of people. The Senate is also then a legislative body, so we can enact legislation from the Senate that would then be passed into the Dáil. And we did that on Friday night with the forestry bill. But essentially, to put it in the equivalent of you guys, it essentially is the version. It is our version of the House of Lords. However, it isn't an appointment for life. You have to get elected to it. And it lasts however long the government lasts. So it's a 5-year term, but if the government fell, next year, the Senate falls with it. So I hope that. Oh, and actually the way you get elected to the Senate is you actually have to get, so I did about 8,900 kilometers over 13 days to get elected to it, because basically I got what's called an inside nomination, which is an Oireachtas nomination. There's 2 types of nominations for the Senate. You can get inside nominations, which is where you need 4 parliamentarians to nominate you. So your political party will decide, well, we want to give an inside nomination to John McGahon. And an inside nomination means you have a bit of a better chance in terms of probability of getting elected than an outside nomination. So on my panel, it's kind of difficult to explain, but on my panel, the Culture and Educational panel, it's the toughest panel of them all because there's only 5 seats. On a lot of the other panels, there's 9 seats, 11 seats. So you need the highest amount of votes. And the reason why I went for that panel, A, I qualify for it, but B, you need a substantial, like on some panels you could get elected with 30 votes. On my panel, I needed 102 votes to get elected. So that's 102 individuals voted for me. I went for it because it's perceived to be the hardest panel. So a lot of people are scared off from going for it. So in reality, and I knew Fine Gael would have 2 seats on it. So I said, in reality, I'm only going to be up against 2 or 3 really big contenders here. So a lot of the time you just have to beat one person to win 1 seat. So that's kind of why I went for that. The other big advantage when you run for the Senate is that if you don't have any geographical space, so I'm from Dundalk and there wasn't another Fine Gael candidate on my panel from most of my province, which is Leinster. So I kind of had a free run at it and could pick up a lot of potential votes. If you were running and there's someone on the same panel from you from the next county over or within, 50 kilometres of you, that's your natural base of votes kind of gone. The other final thing about it is the reason why it was. So we got our inside nominations, I think, on the 27th of February. So the next morning I was in the car and off I went. And basically you're living out of the car for like the 4 or 5 weeks. You're traveling around all of Ireland because you have to meet the county councillors individually in their homes. It's not about picking up the phone. It's one-on-one individual canvassing. And Fine Gael had 255 councillors. We had about 16 senators and maybe 35 TDs. So you were going around all of Ireland meeting all of there was no point me going to a Fianna Fail guy or a Green Party person or Sinn Fein because they'd never vote for me because I'm not in their party. So you only canvass your own political party, really. And the reason we only had 13 days was because then on the 13th day, COVID was really taking off in Ireland, which I think was around the 14th of March or the 15th of March. And some candidates were saying, I'm going to stop canvassing. And I was like, well, they're going to have to declare like political martial law in Ireland for me to stop canvassing like in the middle of this. And then political martial law was declared by Pascal Donoghue, our Minister for Finance, who was the Director of Elections for the Senate. So he said that all Fine Gael Senate candidates had to stop canvassing. So that was that on that day. So I only had 13 days on it. And then the rest of the time then, but in those 13 days, I got to every county in Ireland except for Donegal and Waterford. So I really put you're starting at 6 a.m. to get to a point. You're meeting someone at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you could be meeting someone at, you could meeting a farmer who's, finished on his farm at 12 o'clock at night, and you're meeting them in their laneway at 12 o'clock at night. So it's a great way to see Ireland, that's for sure.
Right. And could you tell us what the difference is? Because in a way, the party names in this country and many others indicate what their politics are. So we're Liberals. I've never understood the difference between the 2 main parties in Ireland, and particularly, what's the difference now? You're in a coalition.
Yeah, so essentially to give you a bit of the context, and this will give a bit of historical context, right? So it all goes back to the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty on December 6th in 1922, and Michael Collins led a delegation over to Churchill, not Gladstone, God, I'm 40 years ahead, Lloyd George, Birkenhead and the rest. And essentially what happened was they went over to negotiate a peace. They came back and the treaty then had essentially cut Ireland in half and excluded the 6 counties in Ulster. And this wasn't acceptable to Eamon de Valera, who had sent Collins essentially over there to do it. Now, Collins knew coming back that it wasn't the perfect deal. And he said that when he was signing that treaty himself, he was signing his own death warrant, that he'd be assassinated for it. And he was assassinated within 10 months of that. And essentially, what happened with it then was he came back with that treaty. And the reason why Collins really came back with it was because he felt it was a stepping stone to achieving a united Ireland, that it was the absolute best deal that they could get at that point in time. They came back to the Dáil, and the Dáil then voted on it. I should know what the result was, but I don't, so that's terrible. But I think it was about 4 or 5 votes in favour of the treaty. And then what happened was you had a huge split in Irish politics then. And what you had became pro-treaty and anti-treaty forces. And then a civil war in Ireland started for about a year and a half to 2 years afterwards, between the pro-treaty and the anti-treaty forces. And essentially then what happened was that Ireland's two major political parties were born out of that, pro-treaty and anti-treaty. So my party is Fine Gael, and our natural figurehead would be Michael Collins. Fianna Fail, their natural party is Eamon de Valera as their figurehead. So the two major political parties in Ireland have actually stemmed from these two figures, which came out of the Civil War. And that was the major difference. Fianna Fail, coming to Gaelhead, were the government of Ireland for the first 10 years from 1922 to 1932. And they were the predecessors of my party, which was formed in 1933, which became Fine Gael. And Fine Gael is Irish essentially for a united Ireland. Fianna Fail is Irish for Soldiers of Destiny. And I think Sinn Fein, and again, I should know this, but I think Sinn Fein is Irish for something like Ourselves Alone. But the Sinn Fein party you know today is not the Sinn Fein party that was established in 1912 by Arthur Griffin. They're two totally separate political parties. And the Sinn Fein party of today tried to claim their political heritage back to that time, which is like the Sinn Fein party you had today was set up in the 1970s, essentially. They're two totally separate political parties. And essentially what you would have had was you had Sinn Fein, which was every Irish nationalist. And then in 1922, they split into anti and treaty forces. And then from that anti and pro-treaty you had born out of it was Fine Gael and Fianna Fail. So that's essentially the historical context of where those two political parties came from. And then you had the Labour Party is the oldest party in Ireland. They were established in 1912, I think.
But in practical terms today, are you more pro-market or more anti-market or more social than the other lot? So today, what's the politics mean?
I think you have to kind of look at the politics of the last 60, 70 years in Ireland to try and get a view of that, right? To be perfectly honest, there is little or no difference really between Fianna Fail or Fine Gael, other than what was the Civil War, which was 100 years ago. But that really, I really can't over exaggerate this. That split Irish politics right down the middle for 60, 70 years. Even up until the 1980s, what side your family took in the Civil War was a real bone of contention. You had brothers fighting against brothers, families against families. It split the country right down the middle. I suppose what the difference with my party and Fianna Fail is, Fine Gael have traditionally always been the second largest party in Ireland. Like Fianna Fail have dominated Irish politics for 80 years, right up until the economic crash of 2011. And since then, over the last 10 years, Fianna Fail have been a massively weakened force. Like they were totally wiped out pretty much. Went from 70-something seats to 19 seats in 2011. So they really have been struggling to kind of come back, but they are in government now. I suppose what's the difference between the two parties? To be pretty blunt about it, Fianna Fail would have come in, ran the country for a couple of years, and it would have been resulting in Fine Gael coming in and cleaning up their mess, and then people wouldn't have liked that, and then we were thrown back out, a second time. There actually, until Enda Kenny in 2016, Fine Gael never won a second term ever in the history of the party. There was never a Fine Gael Taoiseach re-elected Taoiseach until 2016. The other thing, I suppose, if you look at Fianna Fail, there was a huge level of corruption within Fianna Fail that was never really prevalent in my own party. And that's from the 1980s with Charlie Haughey, right up to tribunals which took place about rezoning lands and everything in the 90s and the early 2000s. So that really is politically speaking, though, as of today, I think, again, a bit historically, maybe a little bit more, Fianna Fail traditionally would have been with a more conservative centre-right party. Fine Gael and Fianna Fail certainly would have been on the centre-right of Irish politics. However, I would have always felt there was quite a strong liberal wing within Fine Gael, which would have stemmed back to the early 1980s under Gareth Fitzgerald, who was our Taoiseach, who was one of the most liberal Taoiseachs this country ever had. And he, and what was really created around that time was the Just Society, which was Fine Gael's vision back then for a just society in Ireland. But now at the minute, there is no, look, Irish politics is so centralised. Like all political parties are more or less in the centre. So you have Fine Gael and Fianna Fail. Like I'm the centrist, like I'm smack bang in the middle, essentially. Do you know what I mean? I'm absolutely liberal on all social issues. And I believe then in competition and the free market economy to a certain degree. So there really isn't much of a difference in terms of the standout stuff between Fine Gael and Fianna Fail. One of the biggest things that Fine Gael had was that, we managed the economy responsibly, and the economy was a big part of our stick. But right now, you have Sinn Fein would be on the left. You have the Labour Party would be on the left, and then you have the far left, which is People Before Profit, Anti-Austerity Alliance. And then you would essentially have Fine Gael and Fianna Fail straddling what I would call the centrist gap of Irish politics. And you also have a rise of the far right in the last 2 or 3 years. Really, really nasty stuff.
And recently, Irish politics has made the news over here in the UK for having some fairly stonking results for progressive social issues in terms of referendum results. So on the equal marriage, on abortion moving forwards. Where were Fine Gael on some of those issues?
Yeah, we introduced them. So we're the party in government that put them in. And now what we're actually looking at, that's kind of been discussed, is a legislation in relation to dying with dignity. And that was put in with by Gino Kenny, an Anti-Austerity Alliance TD. And essentially a lot of people in our parliamentary party are very supportive of it. And the question is now, and Gino has admitted this himself, the bill that he has before the Oireachtas at the minute isn't perfect. So now we have to decide what way are we going to tease that out. Are we going to do it through a constitutional convention, which saw marriage equality come about, which was basically the people coming together and discussing it and then putting a question in a referendum? Or are we going to do it with the way we dealt with repealing the 8th, which was to set up a special Oireachtas committee? So that needs to be teased out. But basically, I would feel that Fine Gael led in the forefront of all of those issues, particularly our Taoiseach now, Leo Varadkar, who came out as gay a couple of months before the marriage equality referendum. And then in terms of repealing the 8th, we had some really, really strong hitters in that. We had Kate O'Connell, a former TD, Simon Harris, our Minister for Health, Leo Varadkar at the time, really, really led on that. But you had people in Ireland who were advocating for, female reproductive, abortion rights for a very long time, since the 1980s or before. And it only really got put on the political agenda around 2012, 2013, with the death of a lady called Safida Halapanara in a Dublin hospital. And then we passed legislation in 2013, the Protection of Life Under Pregnancy Bill, and then we came ahead with a referendum which basically opened it up. And I campaigned extremely hard for marriage equality and the abortion referendum, and it was a brilliant result, 63%, 64%. It was huge, and it really threw off the shackles of what people perhaps from outside of Ireland would look at, Catholic Ireland or conservative Ireland, or which really is not the case, and that's been shown time and time again with the really progressive things that we've done in the last 7 or 8 years.
I was following very much the people who returned home for that vote. And I must say I was nearly in tears to see young people travelling from all over the world, their mums and dads picking them up from the airport, taking them to vote, them straight back to the airport to go back to Australia. The way that young Irish people rallied round that vote was an absolute tribute to the strength and vitality of your political system.
I can concur that I was at a wedding last autumn, just before our general election was called, and the two brides had campaigned strongly in the marriage equality referendum. And in the best man's speech, he mentioned how hard they'd worked, and this was the result, this wonderful day. Tears across the whole room, 150 people completely in floods. It transformed, I think you're right, John, the way that a lot of people looked from the outside in at Ireland and were able to see actually where Ireland is today, not some of the stereotypes about where some of the views of the population at large in Ireland were maybe decades ago.
And sorry about that bell, it's going to ring for the next 4 minutes and then after that it'll stop. But I remember the night of the final day of voting in the abortion referendum, and I'd been campaigning all day, and it was about 9 o'clock, and I was going to a political event in Dublin that night. So I was getting a taxi across Dublin, and I just remember sitting in the back seat of the taxi and looking out, and there was such a sense, I know I don't mean to sound cringy or anything, but there's such a sense of change in the air. There's just something in the air that night. Like every street corner you passed, there was people out handing out, flyers advocating a yes vote. Still, even with an hour to go to polls closing, people are out in the streets campaigning. And I'll never forget sitting at that event at about 10 o'clock or whatever time it was, and the exit poll came out from RTE to say that was 63% in favour. And that was just, you know, and it was announced at the event that I was at, and there was just a huge gasp of an intake of air, and then just wonderful scenes afterwards. You know, it just really felt it, you know. And I remember the next morning then I'd stayed in Dublin that night, and the next morning I was driving down the motorway to go to Dundalk to go to the Count Centre, and I was stopped at the toll bridge, and I was chatting to the girl at the thing, you know, and the two of us were just kind of smiling at each other, and we were like, it's a really good day today. And she's like, yeah, it is. And that's all we said, but we both knew what we were talking about, you know. So it was really, really wonderful.
Well, you've segued us neatly to the big problem now, which is what happens now, because we have a very clear view as Lib Dems, as you're aware, that the Good Friday Agreement means something and needs preserving. Interestingly, that's shared in America. What's the view of Ireland to the fact that our government in the UK wants to basically chuck it away?
Oh, I'm probably not being too. I probably shouldn't say this, but I just think I think Boris Johnson is one of the most disingenuous individuals going. I think there is absolutely zero regard for the Good Friday Agreement or even Northern Ireland in general. I think Ireland has always been an afterthought to the Tory government over the last couple of years. What I would say about it is, what I actually think, like, so I'm from Dundalk, which is a border constituency, which saw a huge brunt of the huge impact from the Troubles over the last 40 odd years. And what a lot of people fail to understand in my area, the benefit of the Good Friday Agreement over the last 20 years, is that the border communities are now so intrinsically linked with each other. It's that the social fabric that has developed over the last 20 years. And what I mean by that is, you have, say, take North Louth, where I'm from, and South Armagh, which is in Ulster, so 10 minutes away from me. You have people who are, say, you're from North Louth, but your wife is from South Armagh. Your kids go to school in North Louth, but they go and stay with their granny after school and play Gaelic in South Armagh after school. You have people who work in Louth County Council. 16% of our staff in Louth County Council live in Northern Ireland. You know, they might cross the border 3 or 4 times a day coming to and from work. It's such a fabric of society that is, you know, communities interwoven with each other. And there was such a blatant disregard from London towards maintaining that and maintaining the peace that John Hume and other people have built and contributed to over the last 20 years. I think Leo Varadkar, Simon Coveney in particular, have had huge patience with Britain, and the EU have at every stage. We've tried to work with them at every stage. We've tried to make a deal as quickly as possible. And you see then, you know, with your general election in December, you know, Boris Johnson with this oven-ready deal, you know, and you know, where's that? You know, it's non-existent. I think, but look, we want to, from the Irish government's point of view and from the EU's point of view, you know, we want to make this as successful as possible, and we want to make this as painless as possible for the people on the island of Ireland, both north and south. And the way we do that is uphold the Good Friday Agreement in totality. You know, it's not a case. The British government made really strong commitments in 1998 when Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, and everyone else put that agreement together, and those commitments have to be honoured.
There'll be lots of Lib Dems who are really interested in the coalition that you guys are currently in the Republic, and about how these historically warring parties, Fine Gael and Fianna Fail, and now have come together to form a government based on the general election result from earlier this year. I wonder if you could give us some reflections on that. How's it going? What's going really well? And maybe what are the areas of disagreement between the two parties?
Yeah, so essentially, again, just to give a historical context of it, what traditionally you would have always had in Ireland was Fianna Fail up until 1977 would regularly have gotten overall majorities. Do you know what I mean? So like my constituency, Louth, is a 5-seater now. In 1981, it was a 4-seater, and Fianna Fail won 3 out of 4 seats. You know, they dominated Irish politics. So a lot of the time they would have gone into government by themselves, or since 1977 onwards, they would have gone into government with a smaller party, which sometimes was a now defunct party called the Progressive Democrats, who were built in the 1980s out of a dispute within Fianna Fail. So they were an offshoot of Fianna Fail. A whole rake of them left, set up their own political party for 20 odd years, and they were in government a lot. Fine Gael tended to match up with the Labour Party in a coalition government as well. So you only really had and the Greens went in with Fianna Fail in 2007. So you really only had a two-party coalition. And with the smaller party, you know, without being rude about it, being sometimes wrongly treated as the mudguard, I suppose, of the coalition. Now what we have is
That's a good description we should remember, isn't it?
Yeah. Now what we have for the first time ever is, you know, the two old enemies coming together along with the Green Party. So we have a three-way coalition. It's had a very rocky start. There's no point not saying that. Like, everyone will acknowledge that it's had probably the rockiest start of any government over the last 3 or 4 months for a whole variety of issues. But what does seem to be clear is that Leo Varadkar, my party leader, and Taoiseach, Micheál Martin and Eamon Ryan, the leader of the Green Party, have a very good working relationship together. And basically what we need to do is just to get the functionality of government to you know, running smoothly between three political parties and get communication lines working properly and that type of thing. But the relationship at the top between ministers and party leaders is very, very strong. And look, the thing about it is, all politics aside, we have to make this work. You know, we're in the middle of a world pandemic. There's no room for failure here. So government has to work. And I think what's actually happening now with Ireland a little bit is it's becoming like, the days are gone of Fine Gael and Fianna Fail dominating Irish political politics. It's so, you know, even back in 2007, previous elections, you had 80% of the electorate voting for either of those two parties. Now what we have is a much more fractured political discourse, where I think, like on the continent, coalition governments are going to become, and I mean a coalition government of 2 or 3 parties, not a big party and a small party just to make up the numbers. I think coalition governments are really going to become a thing of the future for the next 10 or 15 years anyway. There's been a real, and especially in the last election with the huge breakthrough that the Sinn Fein had, there's been a real radical realignment of Irish politics, which actually now, funny enough, is probably now been based more on a left-right axis than Irish politics ever had before, because left or right never really came into Irish politics. It was Fianna Fail or Fine Gael, you know. So
can I just pick up on that? Because I'm really interested about you, because you were saying about how the two main parties were quite close to each other and maybe lacked a bit of distinctiveness between them. Is that why Sinn Féin had such a breakthrough year? The fact that, I mean, just again for listeners, that Fianna Fail has 37, Sinn Féin has 37, and Fine Gael has 35 with the Greens on 12. So, I mean, to Sinn Féin to come to that level, is that because you and Fianna Fail were so closely aligned politically?
No, not really. Like, it's this is going to be just something that's discussed for years, because we had the local elections in 2019 and Sinn Féin were pretty much nearly wiped out, for want of a better word. You know, they lost 80. They lost, well, not wiped out, but they did terrible. And I'm not being rude about them. They would admit that themselves. They lost 85 council seats. You know what I mean? And they only had maybe 100 and something. So they lost nearly half of their seats. They had a really bad election. They were being written off completely. They then won an unlikely by-election in November in Dublin Midwest, a very unlikely by-election win that no one really saw coming. And people are like, you know, but no, like the narrative was that Sinn Féin, because they did so bad in the local elections, are going to be a precursor to how badly they were going to do in the general election. And what ended up happening was Sinn Féin then saw that coming themselves, removed a whole load of candidates, or only decided to run single candidates in constituencies where they had sitting TDs. And then what happened was they started getting huge votes. So for example, in a lot of constituencies, there would have been, what you have in Ireland is a quota that you have to reach to get elected. And you had one single Sinn Féin candidate maybe getting, you know, in some constituencies, getting 10,000 votes over the quota. So if they had a second candidate, they would have walked in 2 people, you know, but they actually took candidates off the tickets because they thought they were going to lose substantially. So if they had ran more candidates, they'd probably be in government now. Like, you know, they basically had single candidates in single constituencies getting way too many votes. And if they had ran 2, they would have got 2, you know. So it's a very, I don't know how to explain it, because the turnaround is extraordinary, to be fair to them. I think another thing, though, to be totally honest about it, is the election was held on the 8th of February. And that wasn't through anyone's choosing. That's because we had one TD resigned, and you know, the numbers, we're in a confidence supply agreement. The numbers for a stable government didn't work up. An election had to happen, and people are just, you know, January is not a good time to have an election. You know what I mean? It's just not. It's dark at 4 o'clock. It's after Christmas. People are annoyed. People are angry. There's a real, you know, it's just not a good time for anyone to really have an election. But nobody saw nobody saw the Sinn Féin wave that came along, and it was, to be fair to them, it was a spectacular result for their political party.
We can confirm that December is also a terrible month to have a general election.
Yeah.
I think I've only just thawed out.
I was there. I went
from
over.
An English perspective, John, Sinn Féin is very much associated still with the IRA and violence. It is actually that the Sinn Féin of today anywhere on the island of Ireland.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yes, in short, absolutely. And, Sinn Féin, as far as I'm concerned, really still can't be taken seriously as a legitimate political party because of the strong influences that the IRA and the Army Council and former IRA people still have over the day-to-day running of the Sinn Féin party. So essentially what you have is the public face of Sinn Féin, the politicians, the political apparatus, the political party. But then you have the background team, you know what I mean, who are really pulling the strings and running the show. And it's the background team that are the former IRA people, former Army Council people. So look, there's no point, there's the narrative that they try to say, oh, the IRA has gone away and this and that. It's not, you know what I mean? They're not murdering people anymore. They're not killing people anymore. They've moved into democratic politics when they realized that they couldn't shoot their way into government, so they moved into democratic politics now. And they've done that since the Good Friday Agreement in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
A question that comes on, I remember me and Richard have been on this podcast for a long time, and we've talked about the breaking up of the union. And I think it was myself who said it, that I am more scared about Northern Ireland leaving Britain than I was of Scotland. I mean, my best man is from Armagh, and he do you believe a united Ireland is coming soon in light of Brexit?
I'd hope so. I'd love to see United Ireland at some stage. But the way we have in the Good Friday Agreement is you have to have a border poll, and if a border poll is wins, you know what I mean, then it's going to look towards United Ireland. But my issue here with a border poll is, and you've seen Sinn Féin pushing for a border poll a lot in the last year, 18 months, which I think would be the wrong time because of the political insecurity that we have here at the minute. We want to have a border poll when we know we're going to win it. There's no point having a border poll now that we might lose, and then that puts the topic off the agenda for another 10 or 15 years. We want to have a border poll when we know we're going to win it. How do we know when we're going to win it? Perhaps when you have a majority, which is now you have a majority of nationalist MLAs in Stormont, a majority of nationalist MPs in Westminster, those types of indicators that then we can say, okay, let's go for a border poll. And that'll only be instigated by the will of the majority of people in Northern Ireland. And I was with my friend, Senator Emer Curry. And Senator Emer Curry, her sister was a Lib Dem councillor in Gloucester for 10 years, actually. And Richard, her sister's mother-in-law is Flo Clucas from Liverpool, funny enough.
Oh, right, yeah.
But Emer was saying, Emer's father was Austin Curry, a Fine Gael TD and one of the founders of the SDLP in the 1970s. And she was saying really the way Northern Irish politics has become now, like we're talking about our tricolour, which is green, white and orange. Green symbolises the nationalist community, orange symbolises the Protestant community, and the white symbolises the peace between the two of them. And I think what we've lost sight of a little bit is the white side of it, which is the peace between the two sides. Because very much now it's kind of becoming more tribalised than ever before. You're either in the nationalist community or you're in the unionist community. And if we want to have a successful united Ireland, we have to work with people and unionists of all political persuasions and none. It's only going to work when we have agreement across the entire Northern Irish community. That's the only way we can do it. So it has to be with an open hand, an open palm, and to say, come and work with us. Let's make this happen. And that isn't helped sometimes by the inflammatory language that Sinn Féin can tend to use in Northern Ireland at times. It's also not helped by the inflammatory language that you see the DUP using at times. And I think now than ever before, we really need to see the rise of consensus politics in Northern Ireland, which is advocated by the SDLP and the Alliance Party. I really think that's what we really need to see in the next couple of years. And the Alliance Party did spectacularly well in the elections last year.
Lisa, do you want to go in?
No, we've got an interview with a member of the Alliance Party coming up, so you've trailed a future podcast episode there very well, John.
In fact, with the leader of the Alliance Party.
Oh, we've got Naomi. Brilliant. That's really good.
Naomi Long coming on. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, so do you think Brexit has changed it then, John? Do you think, I mean, it's so strange for me looking at it, because I see a lot of people in England who, obviously, this Tory government is horrendous, and then see the progressive steps that are happening in Ireland. And I know several people who have moved to Ireland who just think, I want to live in a country that seems to be on the up, progressive-wise. Do you think this is, and that coupled with Brexit means that you think that is going to make a significant change to this talk?
Yeah, I suppose to answer the question earlier, which I tipped around, I really felt when Brexit happened in 2016, I said, historians are going to look back at this as the starting point of the breakup of the United Kingdom, which I still believe is going to be the case at some stage in the future. But I think what's really happened now is in Northern Ireland, where a majority of people voted to remain within the EU, and it has been treated as an absolute afterthought, that people are that it has certainly put the concept of a United Ireland way higher up the agenda, or way higher up the list of probability, compared to if Brexit had never had happened. I think it's really opened the eyes of so many people in Northern Ireland a little bit towards it. So I would certainly think it has increased the probability of it happening sooner than had Brexit not happened, for want of a better word.
You described before the fact that some people are crossing a border, which in many ways is non-existent at the moment, 3 or 4 times a day.
How you know the difference is? It's because the tarmac changes, because you use a different part of the Republic of Ireland than the north. I swear to God, it's the difference in colour. That's how you know you've crossed the border.
Right. But things will change inevitably. What's the practical way of life changes for businesses and people in the area you're a senator for, right up against the border, and exactly the same, presumably, for people just the other side of the border? How's your lifestyle going to change?
Well, we hope it's going to be non-existent, like that. It's not going to change. You know what I mean? What we're really advocating for is that life on the island of Ireland stays as it is today, that there is no huge material change in any sense of a way. One of the big things that we've done on our side of the border is the government have put in, now this is all before COVID, but huge amounts of money into getting businesses in border regions Brexit ready. You know what I mean? So real strong financial supports all along the border region. And that's one of the big things that we've been trying to do, to make sure that businesses were ready in the, when Brexit comes along. So I think that's one of the ways we've really gone about it in recent times. But it's kind of now, it's like, I think I speak for a lot of Irish people a little bit when I say this, or well, it's just about to get on with it now at this stage. Do you know what I mean? Like you guys made the decision, however wrong I think that was, and I know you guys are on the same side as me about it, but the decision was made, and it's just like, we need to move on as a country. We've been totally tangled up in a mess that certainly wasn't of our making, but we're involved in it as much as you guys are, and we just want to get on with it. And you've made the decision to leave the EU, so let's get an agreement together and see you. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude about it, but
so that leads me to another question that's causing controversy within our party. We had our conference, as you probably know, earlier this week, and we took the decision not to start campaigning to rejoin the EU from the 1st of January next year, but to maintain contacts with all our mates at political and organisational levels in Europe and move forward at the right time. From your perspective as a senator in Ireland, was that the right decision to take here and now?
Yeah, would be my instinctive reply, because I think if you looked at the line that forgive me, not for me to be saying what the Lib Dems did or didn't do, but I think when you look at the line that the Lib Dems took pre the general election, which was essentially revoke Brexit now, was perhaps a little bit too, and this is me looking from an outside perspective, perhaps was a little bit too extreme for people in Britain. You know what I mean? And that's my view of it. So that's my view from someone who was following, and I followed British politics, particularly the Lib Dems, very closely, but it's on Twitter or it's on news articles. I'm not in contact with, I'm not picking up the phone to Richard or Tom or anyone every day of the week, so it was maybe a little bit too extreme to revoke it, because whether you like it or not, and people did vote for it, and if that's the point of democracy, that's the point of democracy. No matter how many lies were told by Gove and by Boris Johnson and everything else, like, so I would think that is the right hope, the right change, and maybe to maintain that policy for a while, in the hope that people will then, in 20 years' time or 25 years' time, change their minds again, and that you'll be coming back into the EU. Like, I'd love to see Britain back in the EU at some stage. But I think that question is off the table for a generation.
I reckon that no, I just want to pick you up, because one thing we've talked about as Lib Dems, nobody is talking about 25 years kind of within our pie. We know it's not going to be a thing for 2024, the next general election. Well, most Lib Dems do. There's some that do. But I mean, I personally would love to see us start thinking about it in maybe 10 years' time. Particularly as the consequences of Brexit become very abundantly clear. Now, it kind of makes me feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading you wrong on this, I kind of, the EU, because we've made such a hash of it, the Johnson government has been such a pain in the neck in terms of dealing with. Are the EU, and I don't want to put this in a bad way, kind of thinking, well, Britain's got to own the mess they create, and actually they need a little bit of time to kind of get over that mess.
Yeah, possibly, but my view would is that, like, Britain are still our nearest neighbours. They're our friends, and if they ever made that decision, to say, okay, maybe we did make a mistake 10, 15 years ago, we want to look at coming back into the EU, I'd say brilliant. Let's welcome them back in with open arms. That would be my view of it. And I think it's very important from your own for people who are in your own political camp in the United Kingdom, who would like to see them rejoining the EU at some stage in the future, that that you guys know that you have friends in the EU, that you have friends in other political parties right across it, that we're here for you, and that if ever there is a sea change again in British politics towards rejoining the EU, we are, we want to work with you and get you back in. Like,
yeah, on a practical level, I used to be a member of something called the Cities of the Isles when the Troubles were at their height. We worked with, we'd have meetings with people from Belfast and Dublin councils, Glasgow, Cardiff, to try and create links at a local level, even if we couldn't do it at the national level for all the reasons we know. Is there a room for cities like Liverpool saying, like, let's go to Dublin and see what we can do together? In a very practical terms in the short. We'd include Greater Manchester as well, Lisa, don't worry. We'd bring up our eastern suburbs in. But are there practical things you think we can do to maintain those links and do the best we can in the circumstances?
Yeah, I agree with you fully there, Richard. I know we spoke about that last week. I think the most important thing is that we try and keep those lines of communications open as much as possible, keep those levels of cooperation, whether it's with Liverpool, Manchester and Dublin, for example, or whether it's with Cardiff and Cork or, Edinburgh, whatever it is, that we keep those, those links really need to be maintained and kept as strong as possible as you go along the journey that you're going along. Because if those links aren't maintained, you're slipping further into, isolation as such. The United Kingdom, within the EU around it, it's kind of like, so I think it's really important that we keep that line of communication open as much as possible. So I would really back and support something like that.
Right, well, we'll put that question to our Alliance colleagues, because they're quite influential, of course, in Belfast City Council. So let's see if we small L Liberals can do things in the short term to encourage people behind us.
Absolutely.
I suppose the next question, if you're okay for time still, John.
I've loads of time, honestly, so it's up to you guys.
Is you've got a brand new kind of government dealing with an unprecedented global pandemic. We are very critical, I'd say fairly critical, about the government's handling of COVID in Britain and some of the mistakes that have been made. What's the position in Ireland like at the moment regarding coronavirus? Again, we don't tend to get a lot of news about what's happening over there. So how are the Irish government dealing with COVID?
Oh, I think we've handled it extremely well. You know what I mean? And I'm not just saying that, like anyone will tell you that. Like Leo, I think it really, you know what? I think, yeah, in a time of crisis, you really see leadership shining through. And in a time of crisis for our country, Leo Varadkar, who had lost the general election, but was still Taoiseach because we hadn't formed a government yet, really stepped up to the plate and was a real leader and showed why he is a leader. And Simon Harris, who is our Minister of Health, did the same thing. And between the two of them and the rest of the government, they really guided us through what was the toughest part of COVID for this year, which is where we went into severe lockdown, where you weren't allowed anywhere outside a 2K radius of your home house. The whole country was essentially locked down. And that decisions were made, but decisions were explained in total and utter transparency as to why those decisions were being made in the first place. So we were saying, we're locking this down for this reason. And it was total clarity and information was given at all times. The big thing that we wanted to do in Ireland back then, Leo Varadkar addressed the nation. And it was one of those kind of, not that it was scary, but it was certainly like, okay, I'm watching a bit of a historical moment here. You know, when you have the teacher of your country addressing the nation at 9 o'clock on a Friday night to say, this is how bad it's going to get. And to say that if the mathematical modelling had have continued to go unchallenged, that we would have had 15,000 cases by the end of March, and our ICU hospital beds would have been totally overrun. And the big thing what the government wanted to do then was what was called flatten the curve, and to flatten the curve so that our the health service executive, our NHS, our HSE could deal with it. And we did that. We crushed the curve. We really did. And now what the government have introduced is level 5 levels of restrictions. And the point of that is there's my friend Tom.
Oh, watch out.
Just in time for a story. Well done, Tom. Be worried, John. Be very worried.
But just to finish that point, so now we have level 5 restrictions. So where I live in Louth is at level 2. The whole country is at level 2, more or less. Dublin has been moved up to level 3, and another county called Donegal has been moved up to level 3. So the restrictions increase as you move up levels with a view to try and get the numbers back down. So we're really trying to work with a way to try and save as many lives as possible, but at the same time, keep the country going and keep the country open as best as we can. So you can't really compare it to Britain, but I really think we've had the right approach since this all started off. And as I said, going back to it about Leo Varadkar, you really see the leadership skills of an individual when they're in the midst of a crisis. And we were very lucky to have Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris at the helm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tom, you've joined us, so you've known John for quite a while, I understand.
Yeah, I received
Put my TV in the bin.
I received the worst CV I have ever read in my life, which had a Conservative politician's name on it rather than a Liberal Democrat politician's name on it. Yeah. It was addressed to the wrong person, had the wrong address on it. And I threw it in the bin. And my candidate was like, no, we're desperate. We need someone. Call this guy back.
Yeah, and he was like, oh, he's Irish. He'll just be a little leaflet delivery monkey. Like, that's what we want.
Yeah. And he did. He delivered a lot of leaflets, did John.
But I suppose before Tom goes on about that, to give the context of it, what happened was I did my leaving cert I was 18 in 2009. I did my leaving cert and I messed up my college application. And on the last day, I decided I always wanted to do history and politics in UCD. And on the last day of the application, I picked another course in a different, whatever. And my career guidance counsellor was like, here, just wait a year. Do you know what I mean? And do the course you want to do. Just take a year out, like get a job or whatever. So I got a job in a pharmaceutical company, putting lids on a shampoo bottles and pressing a button and on a supply line. I was doing that. And then my dad said to me, oh, there's an election in Britain in a year. You should get an internship over there. So I rang up the House of Commons switchboard, which is the equivalent of ringing Leinster House here. And I was like, oh, hello, I'd like to get an internship, please. Like an absolute, like, your man must be, but only for the guy on the other end of the phone was like, oh yeah, cool. I use this website. You should look at that. And the website was I think it's still a website now, wp4mp.org, if you know it. And basically I said to myself, right, I'm not going to apply for Labour because they're in government and they're just going to get battered. So I don't want to be getting abuse. And I said I'll apply for the Conservatives and I'll apply for the Lib Dems. So I actually applied for the Lib Dems in Liverpool. Is it Truro? I can't pronounce it, but Truro and St. Austell, is it?
Yeah.
And I applied for them in Sutton and Cheam. And then I applied for the Tories in Cheltenham and Hull, not realising that Hull, not even realising
there aren't any Tories in Hull.
You know, I didn't even realise what like I didn't realise that there was like safe seats and paper candidates. I just didn't get that. Like, so yeah, imagine if I then ended up there. Like, and then I applied for 6. I could have gone for somewhere else in London, but anyway. The reason why I got Liverpool then was because they were giving me free accommodation, whereas none of the other places did. So I ended up in Liverpool. Yeah, it was the best decision I ever made. Like, actually, it's brilliant. And now
Stayed with
man of principle. We
have friends.
so respect that.
Huh?
I see you're a great man of principle, John.
Yeah. But
interestingly, John, I follow you on Twitter, and what I see is you keep going out with the equivalent of Focus. You keep going out door knocking. So you are doing what we do in Liverpool, aren't you?
Oh, look, the best thing that ever happened to me politically was to go for Liverpool from a year. Aside from the personal side of it, making friends like Tom and Mike Story and people for, you know, that I see every year. I'm friends with them for a decade. Aside from all of that, I felt that Liverpool, in hindsight, was the best place in England to go to learn politics and learn real political street campaigning and hear stories about what Liverpool was like in the 1980s under militant tendency and just real hardcore, you know, stuff. Like, imagine if I'd gone to Cheltenham or Hull, you know, it's just like...
You'd have learned something in Hull, but probably not from the Tories.
So it was wonderful what I learned. And now, and everything you see on Twitter, Richard, is all a result. So, for example, I do the blue letters. I do a good morning leaflet. I do all of those things that no one else really in Ireland does. You know what I mean? That I all got from my time in the Lib Dem. I do regular street letters. I have, like, I remember... it was Carol's story, and Mike sent me over one of Carol's letters that she does about, like, you know, about parking on a street or whatever. And even the way it was phrased, I was like, oh, this is class. Like, so I base all of my templates for street letters off that. You know what I mean? It's like, as many of you know, I've been calling around the area. It just and it's like, even the way it's addressed, dear neighbour, oh, this person must be my neighbour. You know what I mean? And every line was just messaging. And then every other sentence was, you know, I'm about parking. I'm collecting a whole load of evidence to send to our local council. Will you please email me with your phone number and your email? So it's a great way. Then, okay, I'm getting a whole load of data here from constituents I can keep up in touch with. So it was really, and my whole thing is, if you have something, and I kind of learned this in Liverpool, you know, if you have something to say, put it on a piece of paper and put it through a letterbox, you know. And I remember hearing stories about what I know he's not in the Lib Dems now, but David Alton's by-election in Edge Hill in 1979, where they were picking up, so, you know, they'd be canvassing on the street and they'd get a rep about something, and bang, they'd have a letter in, you know, that night or the next morning about that issue. And they were picking up so many reps that they're then doing so many street letters about so many different issues on different streets. And it's just, and you hear stories about how, you know, they were trying to, maybe in the 80s elsewhere in Liverpool, they were trying to squeeze who was it? They were trying to squeeze the Tories. And then they realised, oh God, we're squeezing them a little bit too much now. You know what I mean? We better not put in more squeeze letters because we need them to get a little bit of a vote, you know, for whatever reason. So I learned so much. I really, and I think I am the political campaigner 10 years on I am today because of what I learned in Liverpool as an 18-year-old, without a doubt.
I should be in tears in a minute. But on that basis, as I want to be in Europe, I know I'm a lot older than you, but you wouldn't like to adopt me, would you? So I could get Irish citizenship. I'm asking everyone, but you'll do.
Yeah, I'm sure I could, yeah.
Well, I mean, John, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I mean, honestly, I've absolutely loved that discussion. It's been brilliant. Even with Tom's interruption, it's still been brilliant. The great Lib Dem pod gate crasher that is Tom Morrison. It's really fascinating, and I would love to get you back on as whatever happens with Brexit and everything else comes to its head. I'd love to get an Irish perspective, because I'm sure I won't be the only one who's found that really interesting to see from the outside point of view. And you know, I'm almost kind of depressed and elated. I think it's so good an area like Ireland is becoming more progressive, and so disappointing how Britain's become that little bit more isolationist. But no, just thank you on behalf of the whole panel. Thank you so much.
The other thing I just wanted to say as well is, like, when like, to be totally honest about it, a lot of my own political formation with my own political ideology occurred when I was in Liverpool. So I came over when I was 18. Like, I did, you know, I was in a bubble that I'd never really been outside of, you know, I'd obviously been outside of Ireland, like, but it was my first time ever being away from home, like, right? And I'm an out and out liberal on pretty much everything. And I remember in my first year in college, I did John Stuart Mill in a module on liberty. And again, I prescribe a lot of that to it, where I'm very much, as long as you don't affect my own individual liberty, as long as you don't hurt me or kill me or anything, you know, you can more or less go and just do whatever you want to do. Like, and I think that's just and the second thing that I really believed in was that, so that's really kind of the way I looked at it. But even about stuff like marriage equality and abortion, you know, I remember like having conversations with Tom and other people, you know, about kind of what you consider big issues of the day. And I was 18 and I didn't really have a view either way. Do you know what I mean? I kind of like thought like, you know, and it just really, my by being involved with the Lib Dems and stuff, it really kind of set up the basis for what is my political outlook now, 10 years later. So I really owe that to Liverpool and to the like people like Richard and Mike Story and Tom and people that I met, you know, and did with. So yeah, and I have a second family as a result, like, which is Mike Story and Rachel and Carol. So the funny thing about it was, right, so I came over for a weekend to see, and they were like, and at the end of the weekend, Colin Eldridge was like, oh yeah, okay, you can come over for the next 10 months. You're going to stay with Mike and Carol Story. So I went home and said it to, I was going on the plane that night, and I was like, oh, Colin said like I blah 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 and I can stay here, like, right? And Carol's like, what? It's like, yeah. Colin had cleared it with Mike, I think, and Mike didn't tell Carol. And then all of a sudden they just had this 18-year-old lad like landing on the doorstep with a school bag of clothes to deliver leaflets. And 10 years later, and then I went and I worked with Mike in the House of Lords for 6 months in 2013. And then I came back to Ireland. And I actually kind of was saying to myself in 2013 when I was in London, right, I have a choice now here. I could say I work in London. I love London. But I decided to go home and run for the local elections in 2014. And I got elected at 22 years of age. And now 6 years later, I'm in the Oireachtas. Like, so it's all, I owe a lot to the Liberal Democrats and everything I learned in Liverpool. So I love it.
Well, I became a councillor at 22 as well, John, but I've not progressed ever since. But it's a different political system, I think. But thanks so much for joining us today. And I look forward to welcoming you to Liverpool post-COVID. Yeah. Let's meet and have a little bit of a celebration.
Sounds good. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you to John especially, but thank you to Lisa and Richard and latterly Tom for gate crashing. But thank you to all our listeners and viewers who have taken in this episode and downloaded it and watching it on YouTube and Facebook. Don't forget, you can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at LibDem Pod. We'll be back with even more episodes. As we alluded to, we have a fantastic interview coming up with Naomi Long from the Alliance Party in Northern Ireland, so make sure you subscribe so you catch that episode. But in the meantime, have a good rest of your day, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.